Welcome to Executive Access, your home for real talk with industry leaders. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, I am speaking to Tim Solms, CEO of Slingshot Aerospace. Tim has a passion for aviation and technology. He's the board president of Honda Jet Pilots Association. He spent nearly 20 years in the Army and has been a tech executive at multiple organizations, including VMware, Microsoft, and Dun & Bradstreet. Tim speaks to us about why culture is his number one priority. We also talk about creating drama and a unfortunate and powerful, humbling experience that happened to him during a board meeting years ago. We also talked about what happens when you overdo intensity. Tim is an outstanding operator who really values direct communication. And 15 years ago, he gave me some critical feedback that others, frankly, might have shied away from, and it was super important to me. I get challenged every time I speak with Tim, and I know you will as well. Let's dive in. Welcome, Tim Solms, to the Executive Access. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks, Jamie.
You know, we met quite a long time ago at one of those training sessions that you just wonder as you go into it, like, why am I in this 3-day training session? And I have so much work to do. But it was super fun. And we just kept in touch for years. So I'm really grateful for your friendship and your leadership and your learning. So I'm excited for everybody to meet you today.
Well, thanks, Jamie. You know, it's interesting because you meet lots of interesting people through, your work experience and participating in the community around the business. But, you'll run to that one person, you're like, I'm going to learn something, right? I'm going to learn something from this person. And I think that's what first connected.
That's excellent. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to share a little later, maybe, if I get my confidence up, how you impacted me that day. A little cliffhanger for our audience.
But wow, so you have a better memory than I do.
Well, you are the CEO of Slingshot Aerospace, and I love that because you are, you love aviation. You're a pilot. You come from 20 years in the Army and then have a tech career. But just real quick, what's going on in the space industry right now? What has you so excited and most interested?
Wow. It's interesting. So yeah, I did the flying thing and I loved it, right? Getting shot at, not as fun, flying, phenomenal. Tech has been great. And I've always sort of stayed on the government side of technology, right? Whether it's, federal or defense or public sector writ large and the international piece there. Space is fascinating, right? I went up through hardware, software, became a data and analytics person and real quickly wound up in private equity, but as the data and analytics guy, and this popped up, and it showed up, and I thought, okay, I think I can add some value there. But what's going on there? Why is it interesting? Highly congested, right? So the problem of space is getting exponentially larger. The barrier to entry continues to come down. I mean, the cost of putting an object in space is a tenth of what it was 2 years ago. Think about that. Just so the whole Moore's law piece is around space is applicable, and then it's also really contested. So people don't think, hey, I'm glad Starlink's up there, and I'm glad that GPS works, and we say it's highly congested. It's very disorganized. There's no rules. Once you're 100 miles above the Earth's surface, you're on the world stage, right? There are no boundaries, there are no rules, but you also don't want to make mistakes sort of on that world stage. And as we looked at it, we said, okay, the number of objects in orbit and there are different orbits is getting, it's getting very, very congested, and it continues to grow exponentially. And then, we have people that want their own sovereign assets. And then we say, hey, I don't want to rely on another country to operate my communication satellites. And then the blue versus red piece, like there are bad actors up there. There is nefarious activity up there. And interestingly enough, it is the highest operational domain in existence. So you look at the warfighting domains on Earth, it's a higher operational pace in space than anything else. And so, that problem statement was one that really resonated with me. And I said, okay, I looked at this as a data and analytics play on a problem that is getting bigger and bigger. And I live in the world of investors, right? I call it investor warfare, but the VC community, the PE community has a real passion right now for aerospace, I'd say writ large, space technology, even more specifically, and then also defense tech is pretty hot right now on the investor front. And we're at the intersection of both. And um, I looked when this came onto my radar. I looked and said, okay, very different than when we were, in our 30s. I looked and said, I think I can add value here, right? And as a CEO, one of the things I recognized right away, it was like being a commander in the military. I'm the one person who's accountable to everybody, right? I'm accountable to every employee, every investor, every shareholder, every partner, every customer. And sure, I've got the fiduciary responsibility of the company and the strategic vision of the company. Um, but I looked at it and I said, I think my background, I think my skill sets will be a good fit, and I think I can responsibly come in and add value, to those various groups. And we'll
Excellent.
see how
And
we'll
you're
see how
doing
that
it.
goes. But
And you're doing it.
almost a year in, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm loving the entrepreneurial nature of it, and I love the pace at which space is moving right now.
Well, and you're right in the middle of creating it. So there's a lot of ideas around how you do it, but you're even just the problem set you're describing makes sense to me intellectually. But I'm like, I hadn't really thought about that, and just the
Yeah.
pace of which things are changing. So you went from just general tech, at Microsoft and Dun& and Bradstreet and others, to now like the intersection of tech and this entirely new and growing and evolving industry. Very cool. So
Well, and the nice part for me is like, so because of SpaceX and because of Starlink and because of the International Space Station, people have an idea of what's going on. And what they don't understand is it is a very analog world, and having the ability to bring sort of digital clarity to that world is a lot of fun, right? And yeah, we're this 150 person space company who's punching way above our weight because some smart decisions that were made by the co-founders before me, right? Massive, massive props to the co-founders who had an idea, two of them coming out of the military. I could have never done that at their age and stage. And then one coming out of, I'd say the startup world who said, hey, we have this idea. We think we can bring it to fruition. And they did. And so now, we've gone from, hey, we're sort of an information source to being a decisioning source for people that are in that active warfighting domain, that active operation domain. So,
excellent. Well, and you saying, hey, I think I can now, post the founder stage, bring something to the table. I mean, you obviously bring a whole wealth of knowledge and experience across everything that you brought into it. But one thing that I hear you talking a lot about, and I hope we can jump there now, is culture.
sure.
You're so, you really put high premium on being very intentional about culture. Um, tell me why, and maybe link that to what's happening as you take on new roles, whether it be at Dun& Bradstreet, whether it be at Slingshot.
Well, it's funny. I have learned that lesson, right? And you learn it because you get to places where the culture isn't great, and you realize you can't pay me enough to be here,
Hmm.
right? And so you start to put together, well, culture is the number one reason that you join a company. It's the number one. Number two and number three are so far down the list. Um, and you have the opportunity to work with a variety of people through your career. Some of those people also become teachers, right? And you learn something from everybody, but in retrospect, you look back and go, okay, this person saw something and was teaching me. Hopefully that leads to wisdom, but that prove that we'll see how that plays out. But I heard a comment that said culture beats strategy every time, and
Peter Drucker. Hmm.
it's absolutely true, right? And so you look at that and go, okay, if we focus on culture and curate culture, everything else becomes so much easier. Every other problem becomes minuscule. And then culture, begets talent, and talent begets growth, and growth leads to future investment. And so, but it starts with culture, and look, I have a ton of daughters. I talk about them all the time, and as they went through universities that I couldn't have even, they wouldn't have let me in the parking lot, let alone let me go there. Um, you know, they asked me, they're talking to me about their career, and I said, hey, the most important thing is culture, but you'll never know until you're inside the four walls of that company what it's like. But you'll know almost immediately when you get there whether it's good or bad. So you have to look for every indicator you possibly can. This first came on my radar when I was a pilot in the military, and we're in a squadron in South Korea, and the commander, South Carolina guy, the commander, said when people show up, it's a 1 year assignment to Korea. He goes, they know within the first 48 hours what the real standards are here,
Hmm.
right? And it doesn't matter what we say, it doesn't matter what we put on the wall, that the commander's intent, they know within 48 hours what the real standard is, whether this is a great squadron that is making everybody better, or whether they're just going to be clicking off 365 days before they can go back to the States. And that carrying over into business is that cultural piece. Like, are we innovative, curious? And there's a lot of buzzwords that you can use. And there's also, it, it can be a crutch if you're not, serious about it. Like, we're a culture of financial responsibility, of course, but there's other ways to curate that inside the organization. So what I found is that when I'm recruiting executives, and you talked about founder stage to growth stage, as I'm recruiting executives, culture was the number one thing I looked for, right? Absolutely the number one. And having the benefit of having done this for a few years, you're like, who do I know that's a great culture leader and who also is a great CRO and who's great, at data and analytics, but their number one thing is they know how to draw people in and build that cultural piece. And fortunately, we've been able to do that.
I think it's great. I 100% believe in this. And what I've learned in working with a lot of executives is I think everybody sees the importance of culture, but where they stack rank it, would they put it number one like you
Yeah.
do? And do they really understand what being intentional and use the word curate, which I love. I remember I was speaking in front of a bunch of high school students who were like sports captains. And so I was trying to talk to them about leadership and what they could be as a captain. And so I was like, how do I say this as simply as possible? And I was like, how many people, I use the Peter Drucker, like culture beat strategy. How many people think, culture is really, important? I was like, does every organization have a culture? Every group have a culture? And everybody looked around and they kind of said, yeah, it does. I'm like, okay, so it just happens. It's there, right? So
Mhm.
are you intentional about it, right?
Right.
So when you come into an organization like Slingshot or any other organization, what's the process that you use? I'm hearing you say you come in and you say, okay, I have to be in there and experience it and assess, but what if you
Yeah.
find like, okay, there's some things you really like about it. There's some tweaks. Like, how do you go about bringing that intentionality around moving it towards a culture that is intentional and that the behaviors that you want to see, I should say.
Yeah, and it is those outcomes. And so what are the things that you learn to do that are important, right? And these sound like sound bites, and they are in a sense, but they're learned sound bites. These aren't, hey, I pulled Hallmark cards off the shelf. This is what I'm going with. Um, but look, you and we're spreadsheet people, right? The first thing we look at are the financials, and what do the financials tell us? We've also learned that people are your number one resource. Okay, well, what's that bridge between the people and the spreadsheet? So the spreadsheet is a lagging indicator, right? And we live in a world of lagging indicators, but we become successful because we can take lagging information and say, how can I predict what the future is? But the ability to put that on a team of people, so it's not just me, it's not the Tim show. I don't want to be the face of Slingshot Aerospace. I want the people who are doing the work and the customers and the success to be the face of Slingshot Aerospace. But I always say, hey, if you can measure it, you can improve it, right? That is a cultural norm. Um, and we look to say, right, what do we measure? Well, the things that we want to improve, right? And can't measure everything, but what are the things that we want to improve? What are the things that are important to this business, that are important to our growth, to our shareholders? Um, and you know, and making that centric and central to what we do. The other piece with that is we don't reward best efforts, we reward best results. So if now you're saying, okay, we're measuring things to see how we're doing. We know we live in a world of lagging indicators, but we're going to reward those results. Um, what I learned from coming to from large enterprise companies to smaller companies, and I love small. I love it.
Mm.
All the lessons that we learned at the bigs, bringing those into a small company where you can make that impact and you can empower people to make an impact. And you don't, I call I call our former work together the curse of too many resources, right? So, how do you come in there and how do you expand that across, the overall organization so people feel empowered? I call it, I say we have to have clear, bright lines between roles and responsibilities. And it kind of rolls off the tongue, but that means my job description is very specifically written to me. I know what my job is. I know what's going to be measured, how and when it's going to be measured, what success looks like. And so many times you come in and go, well, when I hear we're a family, like sirens start going off. No, we're not. I have a family and you're not it, right? We're a team and teams have to be successful, right? And teams have to win. And that's what makes that's how you get to stay on the team. The second thing is as well, we all chip in and we all do what's necessary. Nope, not scalable, not even sustainable. So clear, bright lines between roles and responsibilities. What do I do? How is it measured? When is it measured? What does success look like? When you put that in place, and that person is now able to run as fast as they possibly can within their role. And they're not waiting to be told or waiting to be checked. They already know when and how that's going to happen. And so that cultural agility or the organizational agility, huge part of culture, huge part of I know my place, I know how I fit in. I learned my first 2 years at Dun& Bradstreet, we went in, took the company private, through private equity, 180-year-old company, right? Taking it private through private equity, restructuring it, taking it back out public again. That restructuring process was fascinating. Had a seat at the table. I'm so grateful for that because outside of decades of experience in technology, I got to watch a process that I had never been privy to before. And, you know, living inside a P&L and making that P&L work and building that organization. But the first thing that hit me was something called a distributed strategy, right? And I had never experienced that before. And it was a very, finite number of strategic objectives, right? And they are, at Slingshot, ours are honor our customer, lead, develop, and support our people, grow our company, protect, the company, create new insights, right? They are platitudes in and of themselves. But what I learned was I write my objectives and accountabilities to those strategies, and I share those with my direct reports. And they are informed by those. They write theirs, right? And they're inspected. Now, what's the first thing you hear from a company where culture is bad or growth is bad is I don't even know what the strategy is here.
That's right.
It's the first thing you hear, right? And so every single person has written their strategic plan to the company and it supports their managers and the managers' managers, all the way down to the 1099 EA that we have that sits at home in Austin, Texas. I had our board write their plan to the strategic objectives. And that's how we measure each other. And that's how we set those roles and responsibilities. And ultimately that leads to the cultural piece. So, you know, what's the culture? Are you doing something innovative and disruptive? And am I empowered to make an impact? And if you structure those things correctly and inspect those things and measure those things and are constantly looking to curate that experience so that you're not getting ahead or behind, it's going to continue to draw in talent and that's going to continue to improve the culture.
Wow. You said a lot there, which I really appreciate. And
Probably
here's
way too much. I'm
no,
sorry.
it's not too much at all. It's great. It actually is very strategic what you said, but I love how you gave us the practical applications. A great something that popped into my head as you were talking. So you brought in, and I wonder. My guess would be at Slingshot, some of these things were in place, but what you did when you came in, I'm guessing, is just really bring clarity to and a fine point to it. The idea of reward best results, not efforts. You know, it's not like you say, just the Hallmark card. You have to build the systems and processes around that
Yep.
reinforce it. I remember being at Microsoft, and we had this shift to, because everybody was just always working hard and running
Mhm.
fast, right? But there was a shift and a discussion of a shift between we're going to reward impact, not activity.
Right.
Yet for the first couple of years, we kept our same old performance model, which the culture was, as an individual, I would write like a 2-page essay on all the amazing things I had done, right? But there's never read like impact. They read like activity. Look how busy I was. Look at all the things. When we shifted that model to say, no, you don't talk about any of those things. We want to hear about the impact. We want to hear about 5 marketing campaigns you did. We want to hear about the impact and the results. That's finally when the real culture kicked in. Oh, we really are talking about impact. So I love that you're not just giving the clarity around the culture, but the action behind it that says, and this is how we do it. This is how we're making that real every day.
So I've learned to ask questions in those environments where I am working so hard. I am doing this. I don't, well, let's talk about that. That's the inspection piece. And especially at the executive level in a mid-stage startup like we're in right now, um, you're looking and you're saying, okay, perhaps we're measuring the wrong thing here.
Yeah.
I had 35 meetings last month. How did that work out? Right. What results did we get from that? And very quickly you turn to, the PhD astrophysicist who's in charge of something and you go, okay, what you're telling me is you are operating tactically constantly. And people feel good. I'm needed. Everything I'm doing is important. I have more to do than I have time to do it. And that is a sense of purpose. Does that grow the company? Does that lead? How are you being strategic? You know, if I need you to be a thought leader in space where things are happening so fast and you're down writing code every day, then we've got a complete mismatch between what expectations and what outcomes are. And that goes back to the part where what do we measure? And if I have your strategic plan and I've approved your strategic plan, I know exactly how to measure. I'm like, yeah, you're doing great things. How does that align to your strategic plan? Right. And how does that align to the results of the company? And what I have found is that's a very easy way to sort of, aviation term, recage your attitude indicator, right? Like when you start doing wonky things and that gyro gets out of phase, you got to find a way to get it back in alignment because that's your artificial horizon. That tells you if you're heading in the right direction, wings level. And so that was an important part of coming in as a new CEO, right? I'm not a space guy. Everyone knew I wasn't. I didn't pretend to be a space guy. I am I'm a good P&L guy. I'm a good operations guy. I can ask questions. I can build teams. I can attract talent and support talent. And that's where I needed to have really good space capabilities. And so my job is, again, keep the strategy, keep the alignment, and make sure that we're operating at a pace, that's in line with the market. And here's a tough one. Like I grew up in a world where the number one rule you did not violate, you do not invest ahead of the revenue curve, right? The revenue curve, when you're in an enterprise business, drives everything. I'm always going to stay behind the revenue curve
Yeah.
because that's
Perform, and then you buy your headcount or you buy
that-
your investment. Right.
that's right,
Hmm.
because that drives efficiency, right? I'm going to spend less than we're making. I'm constantly going to spend less than we're making. Startup world's a little different. And so, I constantly talk to our CFO and I say, you're going to have to push me across this line because that was a cultural do not do, right? That was touching the third rail. And, I get that we do have to spend here and, let's build out. So I immediately go to, great, show me the capital investment plan. I want to know all the milestones. I want to know when we're into positive ROI. and I guess that's redundant, when we're into ROI, and so that I want to be able to measure those things so that I can comfortably be there to say I'm spending investors' money, but I do know that then 124 days I expect to see that we're in the black or that we've accomplished these things. So
Well, for me, after spending so long at a very large enterprise company and the past 5 years working with all different sizes, a couple of mistakes I feel like I've seen some startups that I work with make is, on one hand, you love the innovation. Let's try things. Let's try things. Let's try things because we're still trying to find either product market fit or that curve that's going to get us to growth. But the mistake is, we still have to bring in the all of the rigor, even if it's just we're going to try this, we're going to invest this, and this is what we expect to get out of it. That's the piece that's not always there because then we can quickly figure out if we're off course, if our investment is going in the right direction, and oftentimes we're not doing the rigor around that piece that maybe you learn at a large organization that you bring down that
yeah,
some people in the startup phase might be listening to us like, oh, they're so enterprise. They don't get like the fast pace of a startup. But I think if you can marry those two things, like the operational rigor of at least having a point of view or a guess, an educated guess, a well-informed guess, so that you're measuring right from the beginning, then you can, I was going to use a flight analogy, but I would totally whatever gear tells you you're off track by just like a half an inch, what turns into like big miles. I
sure.
don't know if I'm making sense, but does that kind of connect the
You
dots
know,
on?
it does. And the first thing that popped into my mind when you were saying that, Jamie, is that it's a whole lot harder to make a dollar as in a startup than it is at a large enterprise company.
Sure.
So you're okay. If the level of effort required to bring in revenue is exponentially higher, how do you balance that there's enough time to innovate? Because we have to innovate like crazy and you're doing it with less people. And so again, that to me is where I go back to the roles and responsibilities where hey, part of what I'm expected to do is innovate. And then I also have to deliver. And I'd say every time I'm like, every day counts, every dollar counts, every day counts, every dollar counts, right? And just part of that mantra, like we're spending house money and and growing this thing and having the controls in place that we do have that path to profitability, we do have that path to accelerated growth, and that creates that culture of winning and that culture of growth and of accountability. And I don't have an executive management team. I have a management committee. I have people on management committee that aren't direct reports to me. Why? Because those those represent the critical areas of the business, and there's expected to be a level of discourse in that meeting because you're rubbing like here's the dollars that I need to do these things. Does that align with the expectations across the departments of the company? And does that fit in with the P&L? Are we moving in the right direction? And so having brilliant people in science and technology and data and marketing and sales and HR is a lesson I learned. I use man I go to great lengths now to hire the right HR leader and to curate that right HR team because it matters so much. And 15 years ago, I'll be honest, like, hey, what's the lesson I learned? 15 years ago, I would have said if marketing and HR didn't come to work for 6 months, I'd never know the difference. And I was dead wrong. And I learned it by seeing incredible HR and incredible legal and incredible marketing and the power that brought to the business when they had a seat at the table, they had a voice in the conversation, and they were able to impact culture and results and growth. And I'm glad I learned that lesson because I was wrong.
What
Yeah.
are what are the two or three qualities that you would say that separate the great HR leaders from maybe the not so great or emerging HR leaders?
uh, people see that they have the executive business seat first and that their specialty is HR. I am
Okay.
here as an executive of this business, and my special skill set is in people, right? And when you get that, it is not a lifestyle business. It is not a secret police. It is people who are there to drive the business with a seat at the table. And you hear me say seat at the table a lot because because I'm grateful when I have it, and I also know that I could lose it. But then they say, here's my area of expertise. Challenge me on that. Like, ask me the hard questions, push back, right? It's not I don't get a free ride on putting the people plans and in place, and it has to align with the rest of the business.
Such a great point. I've had the opportunity to work with senior leadership teams over the past 5 years. The one sort of framework I like around it is Patrick Lencioni's first team concept, which is basically exactly what you just said. If I'm a CEO and I have an executive leadership team, our first team is our team right here. Sure,
right.
you're a functional lead, you're an HR leader, you're a sales leader, you're, a programs leader, whatever you are. And so we expect you to bring that functional expertise and represent that business very, very well. But make
Mhm.
no mistake, your first team, how you should be thinking is the organization, is this team here. And it is a mind shift flip that seems so small, but when you actually practice it, changes everything. It really
So,
does.
let me ask you a question there, Jamie.
Yeah.
So, CEO, and I want that from my management committee. How do the people within those organizations feel to think, hey, the head of my organization, their first team isn't us?
Um, you mean like, so I'm an HR leader and now I'm saying my first team is a CEO and my peers and not
I
you
run the
all,
data
right?
organization,
I
or I
think
run the technology
I
organization,
don't
and
I don't think it's either or, right? You still have to be that CEO to your function and
right.
bring that same type of leadership mantra to your team. It's about, as a senior executive team though, how do you show up? Do you ever go to a senior executive team meeting and there's a conversation around marketing and the only one talking is the CEO and the marketing leader? Everybody else is sort of checked out, or even if they're paying
Right.
attention, they don't feel like they have anything to say.
Yeah.
That imagine the power of the HR leader asking a question that says, "Hey, I might not be like a marketing expert, but like something, what do you think about this?" That sort of beginner's mindset,
Yep.
or that IT leader that's leaning in on that conversation and saying, "Hey, I'm hearing that you have this thing that you're trying to do. I actually think that there could be an IT solution that could drive impact across the organization." Or, "I hear you want to bring in this new system. Have you thought about these things?" All of a sudden, it's like about giving people permission to have that broader perspective and setting an expectation that if you do have a seat at this table, you're not just your function leader, you are a leader of this organization. And I think a lot of leaders that I've seen, they either don't think they have their permission to act in that way, or they think they don't have anything to say. I mean, you absolutely do if you think of yourself as a broad business leader. So those are the things that come to mind. And I've seen really powerful results when people really start to embrace and practice that.
Yeah, we could do that as a whole topic, and I'd love to get back into that.
All right, so something to talk about in the future. But here's what I'm picking up from you. You bring clarity and operational rigor that I think people appreciate. It's like, okay, I know exactly where I stand. I know exactly what's expected of me, and I can see how all of us together, when we're all doing our jobs, come together into this beautiful end result for the organization. It also is pretty intense, especially in an environment like yours, where there's so much ambiguity just in the nature of the space that you're in, right? How do you balance out the drive and the operational rigor, and the intensity of that with checking in on like how are people doing at any given
Well,
space?
it's interesting. I had a management committee together, and we've been working together now about 9 months. And I went back to some of my first day conversations with them, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to go back to why did I take this job, right? What did I see in this company that I thought was attractive? Why did I think I could bring value to this role?" And then I talked about two things that were really important. Again, we've now had 9 months together. There's been a lot of intense. There's been a lot of change. There's been a lot of me saying, "This is not what I want." Right. So I went back and I said, "Look, I've been doing this for a long time. I'm going to give you, here's the things that I do well. These are not my words. These are words that have been shared with me. Up on a slide, me standing in front of the management committee sharing. Here are the 6 or 7 things that have come back to me on things that I do well, right? You know, financial acumen, build teams. Again, I shared those things. And then the next one was, here are the things that I don't do well. And these are my own words, right? And one was, hey, I know that I can bring a level of intensity that can be um, that will not add positive culture and value to the company. I know that I can make assumptions
Hmm.
that are not always accurate, and that sometimes my assumptions and that intensity, can really push people away. And you know, I have to recognize that you know if culture is the number one thing, and it absolutely is, then that means I have to make sure that I'm doing my job responsibly, and I'm also bringing that team along with me, and that I can take that feedback, right? And I absolutely do. And we have families, and it's the kind of things you start to hear back from your children when they get old enough to go, "Hey, look, you know, this is you're now in this mode, and that's not helpful." And so I try to check myself, and I also invite that level of feedback. I don't know that I always get it, but I do know that if you had to show the sine wave of my performance as a CEO, there are times when people had to say, "Hey, look, you're you're pushing hard, you're pushing people away rather than accelerating them." And I try to check, admit it, let's call it what it is, name it to tame it, let's move forward.
I think it's, oh, sorry. I think it's really powerful when you share with your team the things that you're working on, right? I think it models the way around a humility, right? It sends a message. If one of your culture tenets is we have to all learn and grow, it models that you're working on your growth, and it does create that invitation, especially if you say, okay, I know I can be intense. I know I can make assumptions. When you think that I'm doing that, this is how I want you to give me that feedback. I want you to name it right then and there and blah, blah, blah. And then when they do actually not do what I sometimes do, get defensive about it, right? But I think that's really powerful because people get that. People appreciate that. People respect that. Okay, he's human, and they tend to lean in with you around the things that you're working on that may impact them.
So let's talk about when things don't go the way we expect them to go, because they don't. Never,
Yep.
you know everything doesn't have to be perfect in order for it to be okay. And so I'm sitting in a board meeting at a table. The three people at the head of the table are all self-made billionaires, right? That hits a little differently, Jamie. What I learned in those rooms is no one's interested in your story. Nobody's interested in that personal connection. It is, we're here to measure, we're here to inspect, we're
Hmm.
here to provide guidance and move forward. And there was a brilliance to that. But we're sitting around ahead of time. Some chatter's going on. One of the gentlemen who he said something that I wrote down, and it was just an offhand comment. He wasn't trying to put out a platitude. He said, "Yeah, results minus drama equals value." And that hit me like a ton of bricks.
Results minus drama equals value.
Results minus drama equals value. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. And the first thing I thought is, how do I, how does my character and personality fit into that equation? Do I bring drama? And the truth and the fact was, yeah, I did. When I was feeling, righteously indignant, or I thought I had a point that I needed to make, and immediate clarity of all that did was exponentially reduce my value to the results that I was delivering. Right.
Hmm.
So, we always talk about the what and the how. When you hear it that way, you know, immediately you go into how can we minimize drama? How can we create a culture where drama stands out, and we know that it brings down the value of the individual or the team or the company or the industry. And I think about that a lot, and I share that a lot, not defensively, um, in my personal life, in my professional life, and I try to make sure my teams are aware of that as well. So when I start to see it come up, I immediately now go, okay, something's going on where we've gotten to a place where you're frustrated. So before we get frustrated, let's identify the issue and address it. Because when I have executives who are frustrated, we're walking backwards, right? We are losing initiative, we're losing momentum, and we got to fix that as soon as possible. And that was just one of those. That was one of those takeaways that it has really stuck with me. And as I reflect on it, it becomes more and more impactful to how I'm doing business, how I'm engaging with people, heck, how I'm driving down the highway.
I tell you what, that takes a certain level. I love that. Now I can't unhear it either. So thanks a lot for that. But I think it takes
Not doing you any favors.
you're not, because now I'm like, wait, how am I creating drama? And my first instinct was like, oh yeah, that was like Tim early in his career. I don't do that. I don't create drama, but I do. I'm sure I do.
We feel entitled to it when we're doing it, right? Like, hey, it's important for me to do this. And if you see it in a different light that goes, I need to be able to be, the importance of what I'm doing has to stand on its own, right? The value, the results, the activity, all of those things need to be able to stand on their own. And it's changed a lot of the way I'm doing business. And one of the things I talk to teams about all the time, and I look at myself, there's a level of executive capability and then executive maturity. How do you get executive capability and executive maturity? Not personal maturity, right? But how do you get those two things in alignment? And when they're out of the line, we notice it right away.
I wonder, it's so funny. I was just talking recently to a leader that was asking, we were just talking about a challenging person they had on their team. This person is driving so much impact, but the how and the impact they have on others is a little off-putting. And we were talking about that. And so I just wonder, everybody listening should just ask themselves, like I am, I'm not gonna be obsessing about this all night. How am I creating drama? I wonder if how that shows up. If you are creating more drama than you realize, I think that might show up in ways that you're frustrated that you're not getting the next level or the next opportunity that you think you deserve. There could be a lot of reasons for that. You could be in a bad culture. You could be in a place that doesn't appreciate you, or you could be in a place where you are driving the results, but your executive maturity may be a little off-putting or may not be in a place where people are like, yeah, I want you, because not only do you drive great results, but you are going to positively impact all the people around you as you do it.
Yeah, I don't want people working with me going, hey, is it worth it? Is it worth working with Tim? Yeah, he's really good at
is
this.
the juice worth the squeeze on that?
Exactly.
Very good. Very good. Well, I promised you I would share a quick lesson that you taught me. So we had just met at this training. I think it was like a 4-day training, some big investment of time. So it might've been on day 4. This was a highly interactive training. We had to do role playing and different things. So we had built rapport.
Don't we all love that?
I mean,
don't we all love it?
I complained about it at the time, but clearly I still remember it. But I remember something you said to me, because one thing I appreciate about your leadership style is your directness. Okay. You're very direct. I wonder how some people may take that from time to time, but you gave me this feedback. It was years ago, but you said to me after I had given a presentation, like a role play, you pulled me aside one-on-one so others couldn't hear it. And you said, Jamie, you're so good. Like I have rarely found somebody that was could say things the way you do. You're dynamic, but you do this thing with your hands when you speak that kind of looks like young, like, oh, look at me, like if you could just stand in a more powerful way, I think you would come across with that executive presence. And I never forgot that. I started practicing that. And I think it has made a difference for me. And I think back, I'm like, who would actually say that? You just met me 4 days ago. Something you noticed. It's easy not to say it because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but it was a gift that you gave me. And I think the way you did it really, I knew you were for me. We had spent 4 days together, joking and laughing and getting to know each other. So thank you for that. And I think I just appreciate your directness. And I have tried to do that more and more with people where I felt like I had earned the trust. So thank you.
Well, thanks. Directness isn't always great. And it's funny. I've heard that consistently over my career. And, I think trying to know my place a little bit better. Look, I'm 6'3". I'm 60 years old. I'm a former attack pilot. It can be a lot. And one of the things I've tried to learn as I move through my career is like, okay, I try to make sure that I'm not putting somebody in a defensive position, right? Which I can very easily do without even knowing it. I can put someone in a defensive position, and then again, my value goes down because of something that wasn't even tracking. So I appreciate that feedback. I'm glad I pulled it off. But,
so you're responsible for how polished I come across today. So
You
thank you,
are
Tim.
very,
I'm just
very
kidding.
polished.
Well,
Awesome.
I will say about this, I remember it started out, I felt like, when I got feedback that I felt like I was misunderstood. It was like, say I had impacted somebody negatively. They felt like was too strong or harsh with them. I started off, I'm like, well, that's not where my heart is. You're just misunderstanding what my intention is. So that's step one, right, around self-awareness.
Yeah.
But when you really exercise your leadership muscle, you recognize that that's not good enough. You have to be aware of how you come across and then modify your style so that you're coming across as you intend to the other person. It's not about that your intention is good enough. So I've been, learning that around my leadership journey.
Well,
There you
thanks,
go.
Jimmy. I love the content you're putting out there, right?
Ah,
It's
thank you.
fascinating. And, congrats on for being in a place now where you're adding so much value to, this industry and to people that are looking to up their game.
Well, I have like 3 things that we're going to come back to on a reprise. But
Okay.
I do have one final question for you. All
Sure.
right. If you could wrap by giving just one piece of advice about leadership, what would that be?
Yeah. I should know that you've asked this question to other people on your podcast. Yeah, what I would say, all of us are culture consumers as well as culture creators.
Ooh,
And if you sit there and go, okay, I'm sitting here evaluating the culture and I'm shaking my finger, you have to know that you are a culture creator as well as a consumer, and that, so you got to own it.
gotta own it. I love it. Such great advice. Well, Tim, right back at you. I've just so enjoyed getting to know you over the years. Thank you for supporting the podcast and all the great wisdom that you shared today. Good luck to you. Good luck to Slingshot. We'll be anxiously watching
Yeah.
the great things that you and your team will do.
Thanks, Jamie.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Join us every Tuesday for insider access to executive leadership.